A Russian court has imposed a jaw-dropping fine of around 2.5 decillion US dollars on Google for blocking accounts linked to pro-Kremlin media outlets.
Russia just hit Google with a lawsuit demanding an unfathomable $2.5 decillion. That's a 2 followed by 33 zeros. Russia is furious over Google kicking out its state-run media, and now they're retaliating with a mind-bending lawsuit meant to send shockwaves through the digital world. The stakes? A battle over who controls what you see and hear online. A clash between freedom and regulation. Let us brace ourselves as the future of the internet is now at a terrifying crossroads. A battle for digital supremacy against Google. Russia suing Google for an amount of money so outrageous, it's not even within the realm of possibility. We're talking $2.5 trillion. 2.5 trillion, and then do that twice more. It's like someone let a kid go wild with zeros on a calculator. But here's the cliffhanger. The reason behind this lawsuit? It's so wild, it'll make you question reality itself. The country is clearly upset because YouTube, owned by the tech giant's parent company Alphabet, decided to give some state-controlled media outlets the boot. Think of it like someone getting kicked out of a party for being way too rowdy. RT and Sputnik, the big shots in the media, got themselves banned, and the country is having none of it. They say it's unfair, and apparently the best response is a lawsuit for $2.5 decillion. This isn't about money. I mean, obviously, because no one in their right mind expects to cash that check. It's about making noise, about rattling the tech giant's very large cage. And honestly, it's a pretty loud rattle. The country is calling this whole YouTube situation an unfair international sanction, which kind of gives you an idea of what's at play here. It's not just about videos or clickbait. It's about who gets to be heard and who gets to decide what's off limits. The country is trying to tell everyone, hey, you don't get to silence us. And they're doing it by throwing a number so absurd, you can't help but pay attention. Mission accomplished. They've got us looking, even if we're just here to see how far they'll take this. And here's where it gets even juicier. This isn't just about getting YouTube to reinstate a couple of channels. It's about control, plain and simple. It's about Russia wanting to plant its flag on the digital frontier and say, these are our rules. This concept, called digital sovereignty, is what's really at stake here. Imagine a future where each country builds a virtual fence around its part of the internet, deciding what people can and can't see. That's where this whole fiasco is pointing. Russia's drawn a line in the sand and dared everyone else to cross it. Because who cares about practicality when you're trying to make a power move? This whole thing also brings us to another question. What happens if other countries see this and decide it's a great idea? Imagine every country carving out its own little corner of the internet with different rules and regulations and 1,000 different roadblocks just to do something as simple as sending an email. It's a scary thought, a world where the internet isn't a space for everyone, but a set of disconnected islands, each with its own gatekeepers. Some might argue that digital sovereignty has its perks, that greater national control means better regulation, more privacy, fewer big tech monopolies running the show. But it's not just about making things safer or fairer. It's about control. It's about deciding what you can see, what you can say, and who gets to say it. It's about locking down information and tightening the grip on how people think and communicate. It's about power, and Russia's play here is as much about flexing that power as it is about any supposed violation of fairness. What's next? Maybe nothing. Maybe this lawsuit fades away, laughed off as the unrealistic, over-the-top demand that it is. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the start of something bigger. A signal that the days of an open, global internet are numbered. It's up to us to decide whether we let that happen. Whether we let the promise of a connected world dissolve into a fragmented mess of borders and barriers. It's a strange time, folks, but one thing's for sure. We're all watching, and hopefully, we're all learning something from the chaos. Now, let's be real. Google isn't exactly the underdog here. They're one of the biggest corporations on the planet, And they've wielded immense influence over our lives, often in ways that have gone unchecked. But even if you're not a fan of Google, even if you think big tech should be taken down a peg or two, consider the consequences of what's happening here. It's not about whether Google deserves to be challenged. It's about what happens to the rest of us in the fallout. There's also the economic side of things. A fragmented internet means tech companies will need to navigate a labyrinth of national laws just to operate in different countries. They might decide it's not worth the trouble to offer services in some places, which means people in those regions lose out. And let's be honest, when has increased regulation and division ever led to innovation? The internet grew into what it is today because it was a wild frontier, a place where anyone with an idea could throw it out there and see what happened. Break that into 1,000 little pieces, and the innovation dries up, replaced by bureaucratic hoops and political red tape. As Russia's big move unfolds, it's clear this might push us to rethink the digital world. Russia's 2.5 Decillion power move against Google. Maybe this lawsuit will be laughed off, dismissed as a grandstanding move with no real weight behind it. But if even one other country sees this and thinks it's a strategy worth copying, we could be in for a very different kind of internet in the future. One where freedom takes a back seat to control, and where the promise of global connection is replaced by the reality of digital borders. We have a choice in all of this. We can let these power moves go unchecked, let the internet slowly splinter into pieces, or we can fight to keep it open, to keep it free. It's going to take more than just tech giants standing up. It's going to take all of us, everyday users, making it clear that we don't want a fractured internet. We want the world to stay connected, even if that means challenging those who want to put up walls. The lawsuit may be absurd, but the warning behind it is real. If we're not careful, if we let these power plays slide, we might wake up one day to find that the internet we knew, the one without borders, without limits, without gatekeepers, has vanished, replaced by something much smaller, much less free, and far more controlled. And that would be a loss for all of us. The country's move here is part of a bigger picture, a world where every government is scrambling for control over the last truly open space we have. The stakes couldn't be higher, and while the number they're asking for is laughable, the implications of their actions are deadly serious. If we're not paying attention, we might just lose the most powerful tool for freedom and connection that humanity has ever built. This fight isn't just the tech giants' fight or one country's drama. It's a fight for the kind of world we want to live in. A world where ideas can still cross borders, where we can still talk to each other without filters, without restrictions, without fear. A world where the internet is still a place for all of us, not just the powerful few. Let's hope we all remember that as this saga plays out, because the future of the internet. All right, folks, let's dive deep into the country suing the tech giant for $2.5 decillion. 2.5 decillion, as in a 2 followed by 33 zeros. For perspective, that's more money than exists in the entire global economy, by a mind-boggling margin. It's not just a ridiculous number, it's a statement so absurd that it's clear the country is trying to make a point. But what exactly is that point? It seems to be about control of tech giants, and ultimately of the internet itself. Let's unpack what kind of impact a lawsuit like this could have on global tech and trade. The country appears to be sending a message. If we don't like how you're running things here, we'll throw an astronomical lawsuit at you until you change your tune. This is like a diplomatic tantrum, except it's not just some small disagreement. The stakes involve international trade, the digital economy, and the entire idea of an open internet. The broader picture is that this move could complicate how countries agree on digital trade across borders. Organizations like the World Trade Organization already have their hands full without a giant wildcard like this thrown in. If countries start slapping giant lawsuits on tech companies they dislike, it undermines the entire concept of an open and interconnected internet. And that's where digital sovereignty comes in, a fancy way of saying, we want to control what happens online within our own borders. The country is pushing this idea hard, showing that they're ready to drag companies like the tech giant through the mud to get their way. It's almost like they're daring other nations to follow suit. Imagine a world where every country decides they need their own version of the internet, with their own rules and restrictions, and foreign companies can't operate unless they pay up or bow to local demands. This is the nightmare scenario we're creeping toward. You can be sure the United States and the European Union aren't just watching this happen without planning their next moves. They're likely already drafting ways to protect their own tech companies from getting hit by similar lawsuits abroad. This kind of action leads directly to the concept of regional internet. Instead of one truly global internet, each region is building its own walled-off version, where local rules matter more than global connection. Instead of the free flow of information, we're headed toward a digital landscape defined more by national borders than by the pursuit of knowledge. Now, let's talk about the financial side of this mess. Imagine you're a tech company trying to do business globally. The country is setting a precedent that says, if you want to operate here, you better be ready to comply with any demand we throw at you. If other countries follow this lead, it's going to be a bureaucratic nightmare. Sure, the tech giant has the money to deal with legal challenges and navigate all the complexities. But what about smaller companies? Good luck to any startup trying to compete when they're faced with navigating a mountain of different laws, endless paperwork, and costly legal battles just to stay in the market. This kind of regulation could ultimately hand even more power to the tech giants because they're the only ones who can afford to deal with it all. And let's be real, there's a lot of mistrust here. The country already sees the tech giant as an extension of American influence, especially with everything that happened around Ukraine and the sanctions that followed. This lawsuit isn't just about some vague legal violations. It's political. The country is swinging at the tech giant because they see it as taking sides, and other countries may start to view big tech the same way. If companies like the tech giant start being perceived as tools of their home countries, they're going to face some tough choices. Either align with the demands of foreign governments or stick with their home country's policies. Either way, it's going to drastically change how these companies do business, and ultimately, what the internet looks like in different parts of the world. Russia's lawsuit hints at a bigger change, the internet splitting into isolated parts, each with its own rules. Power play threatens global tech innovation. The tech giant's lawsuit might seem ridiculous at first. $2.5 decillion is an almost unimaginable figure, but the implications are far from amusing. It's a clear indicator of where things might be headed, a more fragmented, divided internet, where national interests outweigh the idea of a shared global platform. If this trend continues, the internet as a place of open opportunity and information exchange could soon be a relic of the past. What we'll have instead is a patchwork of isolated digital spaces where your access to information and services is determined entirely by your geographic location. And that's a pretty bleak vision of the future for everyone, consumers, tech companies, and innovators alike. But let's get into the nitty-gritty details. The country isn't just throwing a random, impossibly large number at the tech giant for shock value, though that is certainly part of it. There's an underlying strategy here, one that's all about reshaping the rules of the internet. The country wants to redefine how much control individual countries can exert over global tech giants, and they're using this lawsuit as a lever to make that happen. It's not just about punishing the tech giant, it's about sending a message that the country, and potentially other countries, can and will impose their will on how these companies operate. The idea of digital sovereignty is at the core of this strategy. Countries around the world are starting to assert that they should have the power to decide what happens within their own digital borders. In this view, the internet within their country should be under their control. Full stop. They want to be the ones who decide which information flows in, which services are allowed, and what rules companies must follow to be there. And they're willing to go to extreme lengths to make that a reality. The implications for global trade and cooperation are enormous. The internet has always been this amazing borderless space where ideas, services, and information flow freely. But as countries start to build digital walls, that vision becomes harder and harder to maintain. We're moving towards a world where digital trade is no longer about what's best for the consumer or what makes the most sense for innovation, but about power and control. If this lawsuit becomes a model for other countries, we could see a cascade of similar actions, each one adding a new layer of barriers to the open internet. Consider the role of the World Trade Organization and similar bodies in this context. These organizations exist to promote free trade and cooperation between nations, and a critical part of that is the free flow of digital goods and services. But what happens when countries start to say, we don't want your services unless they follow our rules, no matter how unreasonable they might be? It turns the idea of global cooperation on its head. Instead of working together to create a more interconnected world, we're heading in the opposite direction, toward isolation and division. This lawsuit also serves as a stark reminder of how tech companies are seen by different governments. To the country, the tech giant isn't just a company offering useful services. It's an American company, potentially carrying American influence into their country. This perception isn't unique. The concern is shared by many governments around the world. They worry about the influence these companies could exert, either intentionally or unintentionally, and that worry is translating into restrictive actions. The more governments view tech companies through a geopolitical lens, the more fragmented the internet becomes. And let's be honest, this is a trend that has been brewing for a while now. The idea of a global internet free from government interference was probably always a bit idealistic. As countries realize just how much power comes from controlling digital spaces, they're becoming less inclined to play nice. The lawsuit against the tech giant is just one example, but it's part of a much larger pattern. Countries want control, and they're starting to build the frameworks that will give it to them. This kind of fragmentation doesn't just affect tech companies and governments. It has real impacts on ordinary people too. Imagine trying to run an online business in this environment. If you're based in one country but want to reach customers around the world, you're going to face a growing number of obstacles. Each country might have its own rules about what you can and can't do, how you handle data, what you're allowed to sell, and how you can advertise. The complexity could be overwhelming, especially for small businesses that don't have the resources to navigate an ever-expanding regulatory maze. And for consumers, the experience becomes equally frustrating. One of the great things about the internet has always been the ability to access information and services from anywhere. But what happens when that's no longer possible? What happens when the version of a search engine you get in your country is different from the one someone else gets? When the services available to you are limited not by your needs or preferences, but by the political decisions of your government, the internet loses a big part of what makes it valuable, the sense that it's a shared resource, a global platform for everyone. The risk here is that we're moving toward an internet that mirrors geopolitical divides. Instead of being a unifying force, it could become just another arena for international competition. Countries might start creating alliances and digital blocs, much like trade agreements, where they agree to recognize each other's regulations while excluding others. Imagine an internet where your ability to access services and information depends on which digital alliance your country belongs to. It sounds dystopian, but it's a very real possibility if the current trends continue. And then there's the question of innovation. The tech industry thrives on competition and the ability to bring new ideas to market. For companies like the tech giant, navigating this environment is going to be a huge challenge. They're going to have to decide whether it's worth staying in markets where the demands are becoming increasingly unreasonable. In some cases, they might choose to pull out entirely, which would mean less competition and fewer choices for consumers in those markets. It's a lose-lose situation. Consumers get less, innovation suffers, and the internet becomes less open. The lawsuit against the tech giant is more than just a legal dispute. It's a sign of the times, a clear indication that the internet as we know it is changing. The vision of a single global platform that connects everyone is under threat. In its place, we're seeing the rise of fragmented, nationally controlled networks, each one with its own rules and its own limitations. The consequences of this shift are profound, affecting not just the tech industry, but everyone who uses the internet. Are we witnessing the end of the open internet? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.